There's a bridge in North Jakarta that most tourists never hear about. No sign warns you, no tour guide mentions it. But ask a taxi driver in Ancol what happens if you cross it alone after midnight and watch his face change before he even answers. For almost 200 years, people have told the same story. A beautiful woman standing at the center of the bridge, waiting, not screaming, not chasing anyone, just waiting. And the strange part isn't that people claim to have seen her, it's that a boatman in the 1960s, a painter in the 1990s, and a photographer years after that, three strangers, three different decades, all described exactly the same woman in exactly the same spot, asking for exactly the same thing. By the end of this video, you'll understand why some men in Jakarta still refuse to cross that bridge alone, and why the ones who do keep their eyes forward. To understand who she is, we have to go back to Batavia, what Jakarta was called under Dutch colonial rule, sometime in the early 1800s. Ancol wasn't the amusement park district it is today. It was swamp, fishing villages, and rice paddies, dotted with the private estates of merchants who answered to almost no one but the Dutch trading companies that made them rich. In one version of the story, passed down through Betawi oral history, there was an orphaned girl living with her mother in a small pavilion on a wealthy merchant's land. Locals called her a kembang desa, soft-spoken, dark-eyed, the kind of beauty people talked about even in a city as busy and indifferent as Batavia. She was 16. That single detail is the hinge this entire story turns on, because in a place where wealthy men owned almost everything they could see, land, labor, loyalty, a beautiful teenage girl living on their property was to them simply one more thing they were entitled to. The merchant who owned the pavilion noticed her, and he had no intention of taking no for an answer. When she refused him, and by most tellings she did refuse more than once, she made a decision that would define the rest of her short life. She ran. But Batavia in the early 1800s wasn't a city that offered a teenage girl anywhere safe to run to. In fleeing one dangerous man, she ran straight into the path of another, a nightlife operator who ran a private pleasure house near the coast, the kind of establishment wealthy men visited quietly and never spoke of publicly. He saw her exactly the way the merchant had, not a person making a choice, but property that had wandered off. She refused him too. This time, the response wasn't patience. 2 men were sent to bring her back. What happened next depends on which telling of the legend you hear, and that uncertainty is part of what makes this case so difficult to pin down almost 2 centuries later. Some accounts say she was killed outright to make sure she'd never be able to tell anyone what had happened to her, or what nearly had. Others describe her dying while trying to escape the men sent after her, a fall, a struggle, a body that simply didn't survive the night. What every single version agrees on, without exception, is this: she was never given a proper burial. There was no funeral, no marker, no record filed anywhere that a girl by that description had died at all. Her body was disposed of quietly near a stretch of swampy low ground on the coast, the same ground that years later would be filled in and built up into a bridge, the bridge that still stands in Ancol today. No grave, no name on a headstone, no official record of what happened to her. As far as the colonial government of Batavia was concerned, she had simply never existed. That might have been the end of it. One more uninvestigated death in a colonial city that saw thousands of them filed away by nobody, mourned by almost no one, except people started seeing her. The first accounts that survive in any detail come from the 1960s, more than a century after she died. A boatman working the waterway near Ancol, ferrying passengers across at night for a small fee, told a story that would echo for decades afterward. Late one night, a beautiful young woman flagged him down from the bank and asked to be taken across the water. Nothing about her seemed unusual. She thanked him, sat quietly, and when they reached the other side, she paid him for the ride. Not with coins, with a leaf. He didn't think much of it in the moment. Travelers sometimes paid however they could. It was only after she'd stepped off the boat and disappeared into the dark, faster and quieter than anyone should be able to move, that he looked down and realized the payment folded into his palm wasn't currency at all. It never had been. Decades passed. In the 1990s, a painter working near the bridge setting up his easel to catch the evening light the way he did most nights, was approached by a young woman he'd never seen in the area before. She asked politely if he would paint her portrait. He agreed. It wasn't an unusual request, and she was, by his own later account, strikingly beautiful in a way that made her easy to draw. He got as far as her shoulders and the beginning of her face. Then he looked up to check the shape of her jaw against what he'd already sketched. She was gone. No footsteps leading away, no sound of her leaving, no explanation for how someone standing 3 feet from a working artist could vanish in the half second it took him to glance down and back up. He reportedly never finished the painting. Years after that, a photographer working in the area says he met an old boatman, not the same one, but someone who'd worked those waters for decades, who described the exact same figure in the exact same way at the exact same spot. The quiet request, the graceful stillness, the payment that wasn't quite right once you looked closely. Different decades, different witnesses who, by all accounts, never met each other or compared notes. Yet the details line up so precisely that it's hard to write off as coincidence and hard to explain as anything else either. So who or what is actually being seen on that bridge? Theory 1, the guilt manifestation. Local belief holds that she doesn't appear randomly. She specifically appears to men who have betrayed the women who loved them, cheaters, liars, men who chose ambition or lust over loyalty and never faced any consequence for it. Under this theory, she isn't a passive ghost repeating a memory. She's judging, choosing. The bridge becomes less of a haunted location and more of a mirror, one that only shows certain men their own reflection. Theory 2, unfinished business. The more grounded folk explanation is simpler, and in a lot of ways sadder. She never received a burial, a name, or justice. In much of Southeast Asian ghost lore, a spirit denied proper rites doesn't move on to whatever comes next. It stays tethered to the exact place it died, repeating the same request, the same routine, forever incomplete, because the ritual that was supposed to release her was never performed by anyone, for anyone, at all. Theory 3, the story was never about a ghost in the first place. This is the theory historians tend to favor, and it's arguably the most unsettling one. Colonial-era violence against local women, particularly poor, orphaned, or otherwise unprotected women, was common enough in cities like Batavia that it rarely made it into any official record at all. Turning one specific victim into folklore let people whisper about the danger without ever having to name who was actually responsible for it or which powerful families might have been involved. A ghost story, in other words, that let an uncomfortable, dangerous truth travel safely across 200 years, hidden inside something people could dismiss as superstition whenever it got too close to somebody important. None of these theories cancel each other out, which might be the most honest thing you can say about this case. A story can be a warning, a wound, and a cover-up all at the same time. Today, the original wooden bridge is long gone, rebuilt decades ago into something sturdier, wider, and far less remarkable to look at. The kind of bridge you could drive across without ever noticing you'd crossed it at all. But the story never got rebuilt away with it. Locals in Ancol still avoid crossing alone after dark if they can help it. Drivers tell each other, half joking and half not, to keep the radio on, to not slow down, to not look too long at a woman standing somewhere no woman should reasonably be standing at 2 in the morning. Nobody knows her real name for certain. Not really. Mariam, in some tellings. Sidi Araya, in others. The details shift depending on who's telling it and which decade they heard it in. And maybe that's fitting in a quiet, uncomfortable way. A woman who is denied an identity in life still doesn't fully have one in death. All the city ever gave her, in place of a name that might have been true, was a nickname. Si Manis. The sweet one. Whether you believe a spirit actually walks that bridge or you think this is simply a 200-year-old story doing exactly what stories are built to do, keeping a memory alive that history tried hard to erase, one thing is difficult to argue with. People are still telling it. Boatmen, painters, photographers, taxi drivers who've never set foot near a canvas or an oar in their lives. Which means, in whatever way actually matters, she's still here. Still waiting. Still asking. If you've ever crossed a bridge like this, somewhere locals swear is haunted, somewhere the story never quite died, even after everyone who lived it did? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every one.